What's the oddest punishment your parents have given you for misbehaving, breaking rules growing up? While fighting over a beanbag chair, my brother pushed me and I fell on the fireplace, busted the back of my head open. My father swooped me up and rushed me to get stitches. I was 5, my brother was 10. It wasn't until many years later that I found out how my mother dealt with my brother after my father and I left. As the door closed behind my father, carrying me out the front door, my mother looked at my brother and said, "Well, you killed your sister." I was the only boy, had 5 sisters. When we would fight, my mother would put us on the couch and we had to hug each other and not say a word. My family was 2 girls, my sister and I, and 5 boys. When we'd fight, we'd either be made to take it outside or our dad would make us spend the rest of the day sitting in a tree together. You never knew which one you'd get. When I was like 8, my parents made me dig a 4-foot wide, 4-foot long and 4-foot deep hole in the backyard and then just fill it back in because I lied. It sucked. Did you happen to find an old lipstick tube? When I was 15, I got my entire bedroom taken away for 5 months because I missed the bus. The only thing I had in my room was a mattress and a pillow. No sheet or anything, just a pillow. They cancelled my braces. I was with a friend who got caught stealing. After denying any involvement for hours, my parents refused to believe me and threatened to hurt my friend. Even went to her house. I eventually lied and said I was involved and they cancelled my braces. Still have crooked teeth to this day, and my parents think I'm a petty thief. Even though it seems trivial, I'd say that's one of the meanest things I've read on here, given the long-term impact and that they are not exactly a toy for you either. My dad told 4-year-old me to crap in my cousin's toy box for being a nasty brat. His mother was an entitled parent and he was demonic. It was weird, but I did it. That sounds like my dad and his weird ideas. Most recently, my 7-year-old nephew randomly started punching my dad, so he gave him a wet willy. I got a C in History 1 marking period during my sophomore year because I didn't hand in a project. My mom made me retile the neighbor's bathroom. Nothing more to the story, no good reason, but they did tip me $200 and told me not to tell my mom. Dang, you got $200, I would be happy. My mother told me I wasn't allowed to talk for the rest of the day because I licked my armpit in front of one of my sister's cute friends. Bought me a PlayStation when I got kicked out of school for smoking weed so I would stay home more. They also started buying me cartons of smokes when they caught me swiping theirs at 16. This is kinda like punishing your kid for masturbating by hiring them a prostitute. So technically my dad bought me a Wii for misbehaving. I didn't want to go to after school Spanish lessons. We would have an argument every week about it, but this week's had been terrible. I refused to go, so my dad slapped me on the thigh. It left a mark that did its job and I got in the car. He felt so guilty about slapping me he bought me a Wii. My mum was fuming because he had rewarded me for being a crap. My dad gave me guilty gifts too. Stepmom wasn't around to admonish him. My dad made me go out in a dress one time. I am a guy. I was staying with him for a week and skipped school one day. He came home to get something and found me watching TV and I said I was sick and couldn't go. He goes back to work. Problem was, this was a Friday and there was a party. My dad and my stepmom come home and start making dinner. I get better and afterwards say I'm going out. Obviously this was met with skepticism. My friends showed up in the midst of this. I argue my position passionately. At a certain point, my friends were dying laughing, and my dad switched from trying to get me to admit I lied, to just seeing how far I'd go to prove I hadn't. He even got my friends to tell him where we were going, and just kept saying he couldn't believe how improbable the whole thing was. He even told me I could go if I just admitted I lied about being sick. But I was dug in. I told him he could pick what I wore in order to prove I wasn't lying. My dad has notoriously terrible taste and this was way before normcore. My dad picked a dress made from the back pockets of jeans. Like an entire dress made of denim back pockets. It was freaking absurd and extremely uncomfortable. A massive jean dress made of exclusively seams. It didn't breathe. It barely moved. It chafed. I didn't give a crap about wearing a dress. But this was torture. So I wore that to her party. Obligatory not me but my brother. When I was about 10 and he was about 8, he got mad at me for something. Obviously don't remember what for, and he decided to take a huge swipe at my arm and scratched it pretty badly. It was summertime, and what better punishment did my parents come up with but sit him at our dining room table and make him do the same Goosebumps puzzle every single day for about 2 months. Till this day he absolutely cannot stand any sort of puzzles or puzzle type games. When we lived in extremely rural central Illinois we had to burn our trash. My father would make us throw our favorite toy in the fire when we were bad. Barbies, stuffed animals, even my security blanket when I was 7. This has fricked me up in more ways than you can imagine. A kid losing a toy is like a king losing his kingdom. That must be pretty harsh for a 7-year-old, having to throw his favorite toy in the fire and seeing it burn to ashes. Whenever I forgot the name of our waiter, my parents would give me a reading assignment like Orwell's Down and Out in London and Paris so I could see how the other half lives. That's such a weird thing to punish for. Like why? When I was 13 my mom kicked me out of the house for about 1 hour. I was standing outside in the snow in my underwear. Good thing my sister was awake and realized what my mom had done and let me in. I think that is just straight up abuse. As kids, we had to do a lot of housework and chores, so much that our friends' parents would be shocked if we mentioned it to them, and on the rare occasions that we were allowed to have a friend sleep over, we still had to do all the chores while our friend loitered awkwardly, or we'd get a dressing down in front of them. One time, midsummer, my friend and I were running around playing and having adventures, as we did, and I was told to move the dog and chain it to a particular pole, and get it water. The dog, a large German shepherd, knocked the water bowl over with her chain. My stepdad saw and decided it was my fault, so he took 11-year-old me, gave me a verbal dressing down and then chained me to the pole with the dog collar, in front of my friend, to see how I like being chained up without water. Another time, someone, no one actually knew who, left the door open ajar on a winter night, so my stepdad made my sister and I, her 15/16, me 13/14, strip naked and walk the gravel yard barefoot when it was about 0 degrees Celsius. 1. Super humiliating for teenage girls to have to do naked punishment. 2. Barefoot on ice cold gravel is painful as heck. They were big on humiliating and often public punishments. My mom threatened to wash my mouth out with soap when I was roughly 8 and I was thinking how bad could it be? I ended up eating 1/4 a bar of soap no problem. The next day I openly cussed in front of her knowing what was to come. Her face when she found a bar of soap with bite marks in it, priceless. Having to put my nose on a doorknob for my punishments after that sucked. Pretty sure I begged for the soap instead after that. Well, this one was certainly as odd as it was completely fricked up. Got ox sprayed, variation of pepper spray they use in prison, in the mouth because my brother made up a word. My brother came up with this term heady that he used when he was mad. It was basically just his word for jerk. He was very young. Well, one day he says it to my stepdad and gets in a load of trouble because the stepdad was a sociopathic egomaniacal child rapist and we hadn't found out yet because he pretty much devoted his whole life to masking it and then acting on it in opportunistical ways on kids. Because my brother badmouthed him, and we defended him by simply explaining that it was a word he made up. He made us all take a spray of ock at the lower part of our faces with our mouths open since our mom wasn't around. I was hallucinating from the pain, it was so bad, and he just smiled and watched. EKNRW, it would get everywhere. Eyes, nose and mouth were absolutely on fire. Then he made up an extends punishment to keep us all in our rooms for days and refused to allow us to talk, so we couldn't explain to our mother what happened. Mom was disgustingly oblivious but would never have allowed cruelty like that. He gave a completely fabricated story to her in the meantime, and popped in occasionally to threaten us about how if we disagree with what he says again he will do it again, pretending to our mom that he was talking to us about what we did wrong. For context on how fricked up it was, the hottest pepper in the world right now is 3.3 million Scovilles and ox spray seems to be at around 2.53 million Scovilles. It will turn grown adults into babies. I've had the crap beaten out of me by a group of people and it didn't feel as bad as that day. Thankfully the guy did the world a favor and killed himself after his facade fell apart and his life insurance paid for our house. My mom would use punishments to get out of having to do something she didn't want to do, but we were looking forward to doing. For example, my sister and I were no longer allowed to go on a small trip with our friends after we broke a picture frame. Really, she was just dreading the trip, so she used that as our punishment. This happened with a couple other trips events that were planned too. Maybe this is a normal punishment, but it was obvious she was taking advantage of the opportunity to get out of stuff. They took the door off my room. They also put a doorknob with a lock on their room and the pantry. They locked up the food and whatever they took away from me. Makeup, curling irons, the phone. My evil stepmom came up with the punishments. My weak dad went along with it. I had to ask for food and was only allowed to use the phone for 10 minutes every other hour. Needless to say, I won't have anything to do with either one now. I had a friend like this growing up, except it was her mom and stepdad. She had a bedtime in high school. Her stepdad would turn the lights out on her and she was only allowed 5 minutes in the shower. They had a passcode on the phone so she couldn't use it unless they dialed the code for her. I was a bit of a bad kid in high school. One day, my two best friends and I did some of the worst things we'd ever done, involving lying about our whereabouts, illicit substances, and other trashy teenage stuff. My mom's punishment was to ground all three of us. Somehow she had the authority to do this, which essentially resulted in a supervised slumber party for 3 nights at my house. My mom even got us pizza, took us to Blockbuster, and let us sleep in her king-size bed. It ended up being a great couple of days, but it was definitely the oddest punishment I'd ever had. Not me, but my sister was a queen bee butthole in high school. She drove my mom's Mercedes to school because she had to drive a cool car. Well, my sister did something butthole-ish and my mom took away the Mercedes and told my sister she had to drive the minivan to school and wherever else she needed to go for 2 weeks. She took every back road to school and parked at the end of the school parking lot so that no one would see her driving the minivan, and refused to leave the house for any reason other than school during that time. BC, she didn't want to be seen driving it. We still laugh about it to this day. Hey, a story that is not abuse or a war crime. Threatening to disown me after I told her that I was going to move in with my dad. Their divorce was really rocky, and she cannot get along with my dad no matter how much he tries. Also threatened to cancel the trip to Germany because I was on my dad's side for choosing to bring my twin sister to rehab. My sister said she didn't wanna go, so my mom told us to bring her home, and we went against her wishes. I forged my parents' signature on a progress report in high school. I didn't want them to know I had a C in Spanish, so they naturally found out when my friend mentioned getting hers in front of them. They tend to overreact and so they took all of my books away. Big nerd here. By literally taking my bookcase out of my room with a dolly, and no TV or any time with friends for months. I ended up getting into drawing in order to stay busy in my room and avoid them because that's what teenagers do. I still feel a twinge of resentment because I was a wonderful kid and teenager. They had a bad habit of going too far, which will push your kid away and really make them not listen. It sure will. When my sister and I would fight, my parents would make us kneel together on the brick fireplace and stare at the wall. Crap sucked. My brother used to forget to flush the toilet when he took a crap, and one time he annihilated the toilet and didn't flush. About an hour later my mom went upstairs and smelled it and flipped. She made him kneel in front of the toilet with his head just above the bowl for about 20 minutes before she let him flush it. He always flushed the toilet after that. I locked my bedroom door once to get privacy while changing clothes. In was going through puberty. Mom and dad would bust in to make sure In was actually getting ready or send in one of my 3 siblings. Not to mention that sucker Rob was living with us and he gave me the creeps. He was a friend of both my parents but wound up fricking my mom and he would just walk into rooms uninvited. So I locked the door. My mama had a crap fit. I didn't pay bills there. Who the frick was I to lock her doors? I came home from school that afternoon and all the doors including the bathroom door was gone and locked in her closet. I tried to hang a sheet over the bathroom door to crap and shower in peace but she tore it down. Eventually the no door thing is what got her caught freaking robbing my brother's bedroom. My older sister would never go to timeout and my parents didn't hit us. So when she got in trouble our mom would put her toys in timeout. Worked like a charm. My sister and I aren't welcome at our dad's place except for holidays because our very presence makes our stepmom uncomfortable. My sister has been editing a short film for the past month at my dad's because his Wi-Fi is better. Midway through, because stepmother was uncomfortable, she was kicked out. She's 23 and has had access to that house longer than the stepmom has been with my dad. She also made it to where I was essentially locked, prevented from leaving by an emotional deterrent, in a small room for like 2 years of my life when I lived with my dad. I was banned from being in the living room and I was prevented from going to non-school places by making sure I wasn't notified until the car was already full. 3 stepsisters and a stepbrother. Stepsisters are great people. Stepbrother lived with his dad. All this was punishment for my stepmom latching onto a comment my stepbrother made and fabricating an entire narrative where I am the sole reason her son moved away with his dad instead of his dad being a bit of a manipulative bastard that would have lost immediately had she fought at all because of the maternal bias of most child custody courts. TLDR. My stepmom has manipulated my dad to kick his biological children out of his house because she's uncomfortable with our presence. And talking about it makes me furious. Bash her. One time, I got in trouble for forgetting my homework. My dad made me learn how to play the trumpet part from the Mighty Mighty Bosstones song The Impression That I Get. Another time he had me listen to an ABBA CD and write down the lyrics for several songs. My dad likes music. A federal police officer I am acquainted with plays Dancing Queen on repeat whenever he transports someone he arrested. When I was in middle school, I stayed up way too late reading books. It ended up pissing with me getting up for school, and if my dad caught me reading after 9 I would run laps around the house in the New England winter. Fun. You know, running laps around a house pouring gasoline can be really fun if you have the right lighter. My dad would make me stand on a bucket, then he would throw things at me, and if I fell from the bucket I would have to sleep outside in a tent. That sounds more like child abuse rather than punishment. My twin brother and I were 4 years younger than my oldest brother, so sometimes if we were really acting up she'd give us like 10 math problems each from my brother's homework and said we weren't allowed to do anything until we finished it and got everything right. Him and I were never extremely affected by spankings or traditional groundings. We usually got in trouble together, so sending us to our shared room meant nothing. So props to my mom for getting creative. It wasn't really a punishment, but in order to stop me from demanding any more toys, my well-earning parents for one complete year convinced me that we were poor and that their incomes had reduced severely. For an entire year, I legitimately used to tell people that my parents were really poor and we couldn't afford things. My mother gave me a small 2" by 2" geometric shape and told me to scale the image to fit a 2x4. I'm a mathematician. This was definitely a skill set I already had. I was grounded until it was complete. My mom still has the stupid piece of wood 16 years later. Failed a spelling test in grade 1. Had to write every letter definition of the dictionary in my spare time if I kept doing poorly. Huge freaking shocker, I'm dyslexic and my parents refused to get me tested for years. I don't remember what I did to deserve this punishment, but I was in 8th grade when my mom got really mad at me and yelled, "You're grounded." I laughed and said, "From what? I don't talk on the phone. I don't watch TV or listen to the radio. What are you going to ground me from?" At this point she was peeved because she knew that I was right and she yelled back, "You're grounded from Reading." My dad starts laughing and says, "A teacher grounding a student from Reading." I never thought I'd see the day. After he said this, my mom started laughing and dropped my punishment. When I was maybe 3 or 4, I didn't clean my room properly, so they loaded almost everything in my room into boxes and told me they were throwing it away. It was especially weird since they're both borderline hoarders who can't keep a single surface in their home free of clutter. Years later, when we were moving, I found most of the boxes of my old toys. They didn't let me have them back, but they didn't throw them out, because they're freaking hoarders. I think the weirdest thing my parents did to punish me for misbehaving was taking away the door to my room. So I was being an idiot in 7th grade. I would space out and not do my work, you know, like an idiot. The final project came around and me having the most caveman brain ever decided I wasn't gonna do it. I was already failing most of my classes at that point, so my parents didn't know what to do. At this point they had already taken away my phone, so they were kinda out of options. My father came up to me one day and said, "Cyclops, if you do not raise your grade, I'm gonna take your door off the hinges." Of course I thought he was bluffing. I couldn't have been more wrong. I came home to see that my door was completely gone and a very smug dad. I finally did the project and passed. They gave me back my door and I was finally free to do whatever the frick I did at that time. There was also a time where that had me write a Bible verse 200 times in cursive, but that's a different story. First ever grounding at 12. 1 month. For the bus being 3 minutes late. All that did was fuel my resentment at their bad attempts at parenting. All these punishments seem so weird to me. I either got a spanking or was grounded for the day. Which really sucked because please mom, I'm sorry. I want to play pogs with my friends. My mom once dropped me outside the town limits and proceeded to drive away and kept driving past me 3 more times before stopping and picking me up again after I took some money from her when I was younger. You didn't call your dad on Father's Day? I'm shutting your credit card off. I was incredibly sick and I talked to my dad the very next day. He had no idea my mom threatened this and thought it was as ridiculous as I did. Okay Andy. Not me but a colleague. When her kid is rude or misbehaving, she takes her normal phone and replaces it with a 3310 they got for £10 on eBay. Kid absolutely hates it. If my brother and I fought, my mom would force us to sit on the floor, hold hands, and say 3 things we liked about each other. When they were very young, like 4 or 5 years old, my sisters, twins, would steal in the supermarket when my parents were doing all the groceries. Nobody would notice because they were very quiet and well behaved, and from time to time, my parents would find candies or small toys that my little sisters had stolen, so they would get in trouble, but they didn't care and would do it the next time again. One day, when we got home after doing the groceries, my mum saw that they had stolen something again. So she took both of my sisters and put them in the hen house and closed the door, saying that from now on, they were going to live with the hens. My sisters started shouting and crying like they were murdered. My mum was outside crying her eyes out. The hens were all "WTF is going on here?" The whole ordeal lasted about 3 minutes. My sisters are in their late 30s now. They still talk about the time my mum put them in the hen house for hours when they were kids because they had stolen some candies. They never stole anything in their lives after that. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.